I've been thinking a lot lately about neighborhoods. The other week, I caught the Mr. Rogers documentary. Any of you seen it? All right. And I believe that his vision of the neighborhood turned out to be the most groundbreaking of all of his theological concepts that he put to mainstream children's television. Love your neighbor. Get to know your neighbors. Rely on your neighbors. Put up with your neighbors. Accept a lot from your neighbors. You know, my sisters and I have two sisters, we routinely discuss the ways in which we tried to build a ville and seek support in our lives. A ville, like a village. A ville. 15 years ago, my older sister started a mom's group in her DC neighborhood that delivers meals to families in the community who've recently given birth or families who fall into crisis. 15 years later, they still organize meal sharing, and now they share childcare and home improvement projects and toy trades, clothing swaps, and deep in the metro Washington, D.C. sprawl, my sister has built a ville. A loose and ever-shifting collective of people who have developed a sharing economy and who tend to value the health of the whole community over the individual's ascension. In Washington, D.C., no less. In his 2017 book, The Vanishing Neighbor, Mark Dunkelman reflects on this disintegration of that core community building block, what Alexis de Tocqueville and others before him defined as a township. Remained the defining feature of American society over the 20th century. Americans moved from the farm to factory, from town to city. They withstood the Industrial Revolution. They evolved from a society that had been dependent on slave labor to one that focused on innovation. But through all these changes, the core architecture of townshiped society were communities of people with different skills, different interests, disparate concerns and values, all collaborated with their neighbors in the pursuit of the common good. Well, according to him, it endured until now. Dunkelman believes that shifting behavior patterns, gentrification, stagnant incomes, and so many other factors have resulted in the demise of the township society, isolating us and splintering us so that we've lost interest or availability for what he calls the middle circle of relationships, the bridge club, the NAACP, the civic and neighborly connections. Dunkelman's work pulls from the groundbreaking sociological research done by Harvard researcher Robert Putnam in his seminal turn-of-the-century book, Bowling Alone, where he illuminates a steady decline in what he calls social capital, which is a civic virtue drawing power by being embedded in a dense network of reciprocal social relations. And so we know from Robert Putnam's research at Harvard that over the last 20 years, what he calls social capital has declined, and rapidly. People attending club meetings had a 58% drop. Family dinners dropped by 43%. Having friends over dropped by 35%. You can just text them now. Mr. Rogers' neighborhood may be relegated to the neighborhood of make-believe, no longer accessible in our American reality. We know these trends have continued even as social media has ascended in people's lives, but here is what you may not know. All around you, in every corner of the world, little networks right now are igniting like bonfires across a canyon, and they are united by creativity, by activism, by a desire to help, by parenting styles, by unique hobbies. Okay, well, maybe you do know that these groups exist in a general sense, and I have lived a few places, and in every place I land, I learned that there are worlds within our world, and they are everywhere. They are in backyards, and living rooms, and church basements, and rec centers. My friend in Brooklyn, she runs a weekly Bible study for queer young Black women where they sing every week and eat candy together to find some sweetness in their lives. At Vaughn Crawley's memorial service last week, The other week, I learned about an underground world of wild joggers with rowdy stories about jogging called the Hash House Harriers. Anybody know about that? All right, that's out there. Another friend of mine facilitates a group that has met every month for over 4 years, and the group is called What Would an HIV Doula Do? What would an HIV doula do? That's what the group is. Another friend is a part of a group of sober Black gay men who meet for brunch every month and hold spiritually based discussions. And just this past Wednesday at the 4th of July parade, I learned that there are pirates in Atlanta and that they are nocturnal. Except at the 4th of July parade, I guess. And I have friends in Asheville who have had a board game night every Thursday for 20 years. Without fail. I used to believe groups such as these were how people enjoy life. But now I understand. This is how we will survive these times. You see, I don't want to live in a world where people are not meeting to dream up what an HIV doula would do. If they ever answer their question, then they can revolutionize patient care for people newly diagnosed with HIV. And if they don't answer their question, then they will have still created a holy container for dreaming, for clarifying gaps and needs in their community, for laughing and sharing stories. This is our human pattern across millennia. Reverend Dr. Hal Taussig, a New Testament historian, has found that the early Christian gatherings were not worship services like this, as we now think of them. That format came later in church history. In the Augustan ancient Roman Empire, people gathered for meals that were shared together in tradition of the Hellenic and Roman associations of that era. And by the way, when I say association, I do not mean this modern concept, but a specific term, socio-historical term, meaning part of a trade guild. So the bricklayers would have their meals together, the shepherds would have their meals together, and so on. Taussig describes these meals in 3 dimensions: how they organize themselves at the meal, the time of sharing food together, and the symposium, or the post-eating time of singing together and intentional conversation. Most of these associations consisted of people who normally would only eat quickly while working or traveling or standing at their posts. And so the assembling of socially and economically diverse groups reclined together for a leisurely meal was a radical act of role reversal. In ancient Roman culture, reclining to take a leisurely posture of eating was afforded only by the upper classes. But these people, the Jesus people, as I call them, assembled at tables in this posture. This was in itself innovative resistance against Roman imperialism. The symposium was then the part of the meal where the most social interaction, community discussion, singing, and teaching occurred. Further, Taussig observes that these meals created a new space in which new relational patterns and social structures could be risked without the larger consequences that would be incurred because of the imperial domination in the public square. The stability and the safety of this meal structure in people's homes became a primary milieu in which to imagine totally different relationships, emphasizing the qualities of philia, koinonia, and charis. See, the concept of meals by association were acceptable to the empire, and they were culturally normative. But then they subverted the practice by the quality of their experience together, by their covenant, by their format, emphasizing philia, the ancient Greek word for brotherly love, koinonia, meaning communion, fellowship, or a gift jointly contributed, and charis, an ancient Greek term meaning grace, kindness, life. And so when we are told to put America, ourselves, first, we must respond with koinonia, communion, fellowship, joint contributions. When we are told that we must pay for a wall around ourselves, we must respond with philia, brotherly love. And when we are told we must make ourselves great, then we respond with charis. We make ourselves small in power and consumption, and large in grace, large in kindness, great in giving life. See, I was raised a Unitarian Universalist, so by the time I read the Bible at age 30, it read to me like a roadmap for the resistance. Step 1, gather in small groups and welcome the stranger to those groups, even the ones who don't keep kosher. Tell stories of freedom and sacrifice. Step 2, share memories of the martyrs who were trying to teach us how to be free from our oppressors. Be loving and affirm life however you can, even in this small group meal. Step 3, flip over the tables in the temple when you cannot bear the injustice. And when people act out of greed, call them greedy. Name that. And offer forgiveness. And begin again in love. And next on your path, bear each other's burdens. Make the table for each other. And if you get lost in this roadmap, you don't even need the temple. Just bring the ark with you. It's in your hearts and souls. And build the temple according to God's architectural design. You're almost there. Anoint one another. Love one another. Be loved in return. That's the hard part sometimes. Love people through serving them. There is something abundant and joyful about a feast, as I imagine these early Jesus people were doing. And many of us feel even now, maybe you do, that absence of our wonderful Wednesday midweek feasts together. When I was a child, my family of 6 ate dinner together 7 nights a week. And when my genteel Southern now husband first dined with us at our family dinner, he was horrified. Not only because of our utter lack of table manners, but also by our raucous banter, where we would just try on ideas like a pair of shoes, fighting mercilessly over them before throwing them out altogether and trying on someone else's. These dinner table discussions were how I made sense of my world and where I developed a viewpoint. And years later, on the night before my wedding, I found myself in a dark field surrounded by women who I had known at various significant moments in my life. It was my blessing way, which is a ritual some women do to release fears, to honor the life transition of becoming married, and receive blessings from my dearest friends. They wrote their blessing on stones, which I still have in a bowl in my living room. One friend wrote a simple blessing in metallic pen on a smooth river stone. Feast. Throughout seminary, I found myself at tables. I worshiped at St. Lydia's, a new hipster church plant near my house in Brooklyn. It was a dinner church where everybody would walk in, we'd set up tables, sing, pray, there was a harmonium, sat down, drink wine, eat bread for communion, listen to a sermon, and then respond to that sermon while we ate together. And each month, at midday chapel on campus, people set up tables. Someone would make a giant pot of soup, and we all sat at table. That's what we called it. We listened to a story, sang, and then shared our responses to the story. We worshiped like the Jesus people, who were also, millennia ago, reclining by candlelight, telling their own survival stories. All right, I'm not trying to prove to you why it is important to gather. We know this feels good, most of the time, anyway, and so we make the effort. It is the quality of the gathering that creates meaning. You know, I know Quakers are often known for being peaceful, being quiet. What if Unitarian Universalists were known the world over for being generous listeners? Have you ever met a truly skilled listener? Someone who engenders true curiosity, who seems to always ask the right questions, who doesn't appear to be waiting to tell her own story. It is such a powerful skill that some of us pay quite a bit of money to be listened to. active, curious listening. That is the praxis. That is the experience of being true to our first source of Unitarian Universalism. I'm talking about that that direct experience of transcendent mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. This is a central virtue of Unitarian Universalism. Not necessarily the childlike innocence, although I do believe that children have the closest access to this sacred source. But instead, I'm talking about a discipline of wonderment demonstrated by curious, open, active listening. We can be people of intelligence and discernment and still release our judgments. We can learn to be curious with each other, unbound. And the layers of that curiosity are infinite. And so, what makes this religious? I mean, building a ville is important for our survival, yes, but how is it spiritual work? A while ago, I had the honor of facilitating a blessing way for someone else's life transition into motherhood. The majority of the guests were strangers, or at least did not know each other well. After some chit-chat, we gathered in a circle around an altar in the yard, set with flowers, a chalice, candles, and a bowl of water. The first thing we must do, you see, is cross a threshold. God told Moses in the wilderness he must remove his shoes, for he was standing on holy ground, ground that he and his people had made holy by their intentions. And so we had to find their intentions and their covenant with God. And so we had to find a way to remove our shoes, metaphorically, remove our shoes. And so I informed everyone I would anoint them. And if they did not desire to be anointed, they only had to raise their hand. Now, these women in this circle here were not necessarily Christian, nor did they all know what a blessing way was. And yet, not one raised their hand. Young women and older, dressed up in beautiful dresses and high heels or dressed casually, they each received the blessing. A dab of water on their forehead as I whispered a blessing in their ear. And then I invited everyone to chant together. And we were in. We had crossed over onto holy ground. And here is how I knew that. I invited everyone to share how they knew the guest of honor who was being blessed by the life transition. And instead of giving a summary of the meeting time and the place and the circumstance, they each immediately went deeper. I mean, it was a love fest. Each person shared what gifts they had received from knowing our guest of honor, how she had changed them, taught them, affected them. They shared intimate details about themselves in the telling. They wove remarkable memories of connection and transformation. We had left the realm of small talk and surface-level interactions, and we were in the wilderness of intimacy and vulnerability and profound connection. Tears flowed. There was poetry, too, and more singing. We witnessed the guest of honor releasing her fears about her transition, and she knew she could be real. She could be authentic to her fear and honor it, and then watch it be dissolved by the bowl of water. Something powerful was called forth that day, the power to transform and to resurrect, to gather energy for a new phase of life. And a door opened to mystery, and everyone in the circle watched it open. And after the circle was broken, things returned to relative normalcy. But we knew we had created something powerful. In fact, power is what we had created. And I think some people remained in awe of that power for quite some time. I wanted to share this story with you so that you can know that you too can be a part of something deep and transformative and mysterious. We can create koinonia. And we are creating it here at UUCA. So today we invite you into a small group ministry experience where we will unleash something powerful and countercultural. Because, my friends, the white supremacist capitalist patriarchy, as Bell Hooks calls it, and I guess I also call it, wants you to stay isolated. want you to believe that you are in constant competition with each other. The powers that be do not want us to know the truth, that there is another economy of mutuality, of support, of reciprocity, and authentic sharing, and that we are bound to one another. And the more we can share each other's burdens, the more we stay connected, the more we threaten that which seeks to isolate us. This is how we will keep the fire of our faith glowing strong and burning bright, though we will be in our own wilderness, without our 4 walls, or however many walls this is, without our walls here, without our roof, without our round sanctuary and our memorial garden and our classrooms and our theater, we will still be on holy ground. We will be together. Wherever you are in the wilderness of your life, out there in the shifting stands of political chaos, depression, fear, broken relationships, loneliness, build a ville. Start with just one. Invite someone to sing with you or march with you next time, because we're going to do it again. Build a table out of kindling like the Jesus people did. 2 people can keep each other sane, can give support, conviction, love, massage, hope. 3 people are a delegation, a committee, a wedge. With 4, you can play bridge and start an organization. It goes on one at a time. It starts when you care to act, and then you do it again after they said no. It starts when you say we, and you know who you mean, and each day you mean one more. This is how we will survive.